Welcome back, Hnrs. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the start of World War I, right? So the big thing that we're getting into in this flip, that I'm about to clip in this flip so you can just go ahead and watch that thing, bang that out so you can get on to the all-important thing, which is reading the first chapter of your book, right? And I love the idea of keeping this flip under 20 minutes so y'all going to actually just be able to kind of bang it out and then focus on meeting Paul and the young men that we are going to follow through this war, right? But the last thing we left off talking about in class was this right here, right? We were talking about the expiration of the alliance of three emperors when Otto von Bismarck would originally create this geographic alliance of very large powers, including Russia, Austria, and Germany, and he actually did this to try and prevent a conflict from occurring with France, right? To keep them isolated in the continent and on one side of themselves, to keep everybody and everything over there, right? By keeping everybody and everything over there, what that's going to do for them is it's going to make it so if anything ever blows up, it's going to make it so, well, actually, it just prevents anything from ever being able to blow up. But then what ends up happening is comes along Kaiser Wilhelm II, the son of Wilhelm I, who ends up actually like letting the alliance expire, fires Bismarck, and then allows it to crumble. And when it crumbles, Russia ends up there out in the wind, out in the mist, and France ends up and like swoops in like that little French shark, gobbles up that alliance, and signs one with Russia, right? Leading to a whole cacophony of things that are going to break out. But let's go ahead and talk about that stuff and read your first chapter. Can't wait to talk about it with y'all in class. See y'all then. So it's going to be leading to a frantic creation of other alliances, right? So the very first alliance that gets created going into World War I in a frantic manner is Kaiser Wilhelm II after he's fired Otto von Bismarck, who actually dies about 10 years later in 1898, never actually sees the first shots of World War I be fired, right? But what Kaiser Wilhelm II creates is this thing called the Triple Alliance. And the Triple Alliance is made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy early on, right? And France and Germany are going to be huge enemies following that Franco-Prussian War, so kind of keep that in the back of your mind, that he creates this to try and defend Germany from France, right? And to protect Germany, he signs these treaties with Austria and Italy, promising to protect them if war broke out, right? Now, later on, though, they are going to have a nickname. They are also known as the Central Powers, right? What we usually refer to them as is the Central Powers, right? Formed with this thing known as the Triple Alliance, right? Now, the next one's going to be a little bit different. It was called the Triple Entente, right? And that is going to be the people that they're going to end up fighting against, right? Now, what an entente is an informal agreement between countries because they actually didn't sign a collective alliance together. This one was a little bit weird, right? France, Russia, and Great Britain, also known as the Allies early on, are actually going to come in and they're going to do this in like a weird, like kind of three-way alliance that leads to a triple entente kind of a thing, right? But again, they are also known as the Allies, right? So the Allies is what we typically refer to France, England, and Great Britain and America, which you can jot them down right now if you would like to. The United States does join the Allies, but they don't join up until 1917, right? So going into it, that's like the last year of the war. This one was a little bit weird, though, because France signed an alliance with Russia after the failure of the League of Three Emperors, right? That thing that Bismarck tried to create. And then France is going to ally with Great Britain, okay? And a lot of this has to do with a military buildup that we'll talk about here in a little bit, and then France is going to encourage Britain to sign one with Russia, so they all ended up signing an alliance like in a big circle, right? We refer to these guys as the Triple Entente, right? Now later on, some other groups are going to join up with them, like Croatia, Japan is going to join up with the Allies as well in World War I, which some of y'all are like, wait a minute, I thought that those are people that we fought against, but remember, delineate, that's World War II, all right? So a little bit of a different thing, okay? So when we're looking at this entire thing, though, you have, of course, right, over here you've got the Triple Alliance, Italy, Austria, and Germany. Now, the Ottomans are going to be important. They're going to come in a little bit later on. But then you got Russia, Britain, and France in the respective years that they signed these alliances right there. And then there's this little region right here called the Balkans that's going to be a little bit of a fishy thing that we're going to get into in a little bit. That's going to create a lot of problems going into this war, right? And looking at this map right now, you can actually also tell as well that that's your major players, right? Your Russians, your French, and your English, your Germans, your Austrians, and as well as your Italians. But some of y'all are like, but wait a minute, Mr. Terry, I thought you said a second ago that the Italians are going to be with the Central Powers. They actually are, but when war broke out, Italy flipped sides, right? Italy actually went neutral for a period of time and then flipped over to the Allied side. And they do this also in World War II, which is absolutely bananas. They actually end up killing their own dictator later on. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Now, that stuff right there is your alliances, right? So you've got these alliances right now that are set up much like dominoes, where if one of them goes, the rest of them are going to break out into war, and it's going to end up erupting into a worldwide war from a very small conflict, right? But another big reason why this war is going to break out is a thing called militarism, right? Now, militarism, what that is the idea that like economic competition is fueling a lot of intensity like between countries. They're actually now going to begin to build up their militaries, right? The militarism aspect is the glorification or glory of building up your military, right? So the thing about it is, though, is that they're going to start funneling a lot of that money from that economic competition, money, arms, colonies that they're gobbling up as well in the imperial campaigns. Countries are going to practice this aspect of militarism. For example, when you look at this, Germany is going to respond to militarism by making their military absolutely ginormous. They're going to make this thing huge, right? Huge. And they make their military as big as they possibly can, right? But the thing about it, though, is in response to this, Britain's going to do the same thing. France is going to do the same thing. And when you have giant militaries and nothing to do with them, eventually that means that we're just tightening the tension between these countries that could lead to further all-out war later on. But militarism or dumping money into your military is going to lead to the cause of World War I as well. Now, the interesting connection, though, between militarism and the growth of militarism during the late 1800s going into the 1900s is its deep, deep connection to this thing called the Second Industrial Revolution, right? Now, we've talked about the First Industrial Revolution. That was the one that had James Watt's steam engine, the creation of textiles, right? That, of course, like the spinning jenny and all that fun stuff. Well, the Second Industrial Revolution comes along in the late 1800s where things are going to become more mechanized, right? They're going to have like more gears and interchangeable parts, right? Steam-powered locomotives for moving human beings, right? We're going to also see the growth of like the Bessemer process of creating steel. We're going to see the refinement of petroleum to make gasoline, right? And things are going to become even more automated, right? Well, if you're thinking of making things even more automated, you could possibly apply that to your weaponry and to your military as well, right? And so the example of this new industrial military that's popping up, former post-Second Industrial Revolution. The best example of it is that thing we've already talked about, right? The Maxim gun, which was created in 1885, 1884, right? By that man named Hiram Maxim, right? And Hiram Maxim's fully automatic machine gun, by the time World War I breaks out, no longer fires 200 rounds a minute, it actually fires 600 rounds a minute, right? Which is absolutely wild. And here is little old Hiram Maxim actually sitting right next to his invention and actually operating it right there. Would you just zoom in, you little turd? There you go, right? There's Hiram Maxim himself, actually with his little invention. And by the way, he is a British inventor, if anybody ever asks you about it. He's a British-American inventor, but he actually invented it whilst he was in Great Britain, so it's a British invention. The only drawbacks to this entire thing, though, as well, is that it's very heavy, it jams, it needs a water jacket on it, right? We talked about that a little bit in class, the funny thing about how soldiers during World War I, if the water actually from their machine gun water jacket evaporated off because the barrel got too hot, they'd have to like pee in the barrel, or pee in the water jacket to make it like go really quick, which is a lot of pressure, you know what I mean? Which is intense. I can't imagine being shot at and then having to do that, right? So going into it though as well, this war is going to be the very first time that it's ever actually fully seen, right? And this gun is going to be really, really big because it's going to cause trench warfare, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. For any of the dads or the moms walking around in the background right now that love history, that is why trench warfare occurred, is because of the invention of the machine gun, right? The machine gun and its use in World War I will cause them to dig trenches to get below the fire, right? But it's not just there that the Industrial Revolution is going to impact the military. It's not just in the creation of weapons. It's also in the creation of some other little smaller things, right? For the example, like steam-powered locomotives, right? The telegraph is going to be massively important as well, because telegraph lines are going to be massively important when you're having a worldwide war, because now you can send communications and communiques across a very long distance, right? And what becomes a very large objective during World War I is cutting people's telegraph lines or tapping into them, right? Which is another big thing as well. Code creation and code breaking becomes a really big part of the World War I, and then spirals forward as well into World War II and even modern-day wars as well. And then steam-powered engines on boats are going to be massively important as well, as we're leading to more advanced navies, right? Now, connecting that over really quick, something else we're going to see in the militarism thing is things called arms races, right? Now, something that maybe like some of y'all don't really understand right now is what an arms race is, right? Now, let's explain what an arms race is, right? So we can actually further understand this conflict as it blows up, right? Now, arms races are never a good thing, right? When you're having an arms race, it means that one country has figured out a certain type of weapon or a large-scale version of weaponry, and then another country has figured it out as well. And what they're going to do is they're going to try to compete with each other to see who can make the most of that weapon as fast as possible, right? Hence the race aspect, and the arms is referring to the armaments themselves, right? Now, the most famous arms race that some of your family probably knows very well about, you could ask your parents about this one all day long, is the nuclear buildup arms race that happened post-World War II, right? The nuclear arms race that happened in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s during the Cold War between America and the Soviets. Soviets, right? Now, a big one that happened way before the Russians were ever even referred to as the Soviet Union was the naval arms race that broke out between Germany and England, right? And this one actually happened right before the onset of World War I. And the reason why is because Germany and England both learned how to make this boat, right? Now, this boat is going to become very, very important in World War I because it is an all-steel, steam-powered battleship. It is known as a dreadnought, right? Now, the English invented it first, right? They were the ones that created it first because they actually named the original boat the HMS Dreadnought, right? But look at this thing. It is a modern-style battleship with cannons and armaments, and it actually has a steam-powered engine as well that can take it over huge, great distances and bombard locations from the water, right? It is a very large, scary, intense version of the representation of imperialism in the British naval empire at the time, right? But the Germans actually learn how to make them as well. And so they start competing with each other to see who can make the most of them the fastest. Well, England ends up winning this race, and the English end up actually making the most dreadnoughts, and the Germans are kind of just sitting there with the crossed arms and a big harumph, and they're like, well, we can't make them as fast as the British can because their entire government's behind it, which is an old thing, right? So what's going to end up happening, though, is the Germans pivot, right? They pivot a little bit, and they start making a different type of boat. A boat known in German as an Unterseeboot. Unterseeboot. Unter means under, Z means water, and boot means boat, right? So it's an underwater boat. So we're talking none other than, of course, about a U-boat or a submarine, right? The Germans then actually start creating submarines as the thing to maybe be their tool in sinking dreadnoughts whenever they show up. Now, a lot of people in the German government thought this was a terrible idea. They were like, why are we building these U-boats? By the way, that's why we call them U-boats, right? We call them U-boats not because it's called underwater boat. We call them U-boats because we refer to German Unterseeboots, right? And that's what they called them. So it's a Unterseeboot, a U-boat, right? So a U-boat. Now, the thing about it, though, okay, going into it, these submarines were actually very, very heavily made fun of and scoffed at by a lot of Germans because they were like, you can't see in them. You're blind inside of them. There's no sonar yet, so you don't know where you're going. That little goofy periscope will give you away and all this stuff. But funny enough, that weapon right there, the underwater boat, the Unterseeboot, is going to be very, very important in the calamity that this war will become, right? So just keep that in the back of your mind that those U-boats and submarines become very important when we get into this war because the Germans are going to use them against cruise liners and stuff in a method called unrestricted submarine warfare, which is going to be a big deal. Now, imperialism is another giant cause of World War I as well, which is a part of that economic competition, right? Because these European powers are competing for resource-providing colonies. Now, we talked about this already with the imperialism of places like Asia, and we especially saw it in the imperialization of Africa, right? Because if you look at this map of Africa at the time, you've got all these different areas of Africa that post-Berlin Conference are going to be cut up and given to a lot of other areas. Well, these things about it is that they were competing over these different colonies, and when the war breaks out, fighting will actually break out amongst these colonies. Because you've got the actual right there, the British colonies right there, and German East Africa right here. You got French West Africa and German West Africa right there. And so, for example, when Germany and France and Germany and England end up going to war, their colonies end up going to war as well, making this truly a worldwide war. Now, another huge thing about this as well is nationalism, right? And that's our last huge cause of World War I, because nationalism is going to fuel countries to want to be the best and strongest, right? And this intense pride in your country is going to lead you to wanting to demonstrate your abilities, your prosperity, and your betterness over your enemy countries and your old school rivals, right? So your Germans are going to be like, our German pride shows that we should actually go out there and destroy the French, right? Like, of course, that's going to be actually like a thing that's bubbling up under the surface. Now, don't write this, but for example, the outbreak of war was greeted by cheering crowds in Berlin and Vienna and Paris, right? As a writer named A.P.J. Taylor wrote, okay? So the thing about it when we're looking at this is there are famous writers from this time period who actually really defined the nationalism of the era because they were like, look, when this war broke out, there were crowds cheering for it in the streets of Berlin, which is in Germany, and Vienna, which is in Austria, and Paris in France, right? A.P.J. Taylor also wrote that the people of Europe leapt willingly into this war, right? Which means that it actually demonstrates to us that they were excited to go to war because of that nationalistic fuel. Now, the thing about it, though, is the thing that's going to end up breaking all this stuff out, that's going to end up causing all this, like, calamity, that where it's all going to go down, isn't actually going to happen in Germany. It's not going to happen in France. It's not going to happen in England. It's not going to happen even in Spain or Italy. It's going to happen in this dark-colored green section of the map right there, known as the Balkans, right? Well, the Balkans are going to be the place where the war ends up breaking out, and then it spills over and turns into a worldwide war because of this concept, a thing that was on the rise in the late 1800s known as panslavism, that heavily relates to nationalism and also is going to be the ultimate cause of this war, right? The thing that tips the scales over and throws us into war, right? Now, what panslavism is the belief that all Slavic people should unify and defend one another, right? That Slavic people should come together, and while they're in the process of trying to have their own self-determined countries, while Serbia is trying to unite Serbs together to have a country known as Serbia, while Bosnians are doing the same, while Croatians are doing the same, while Bulgarians and not Romanians, they're not Slavic, don't tell them they are, they get very upset, and like all these other things, they should be allowed to do that, right? And that they should support one another in this mission, right? You've seen Pan-Slavism before in history when you talk about Yugoslavia, or the former Yugoslavia, which was actually a Slavic country that actually was combined together post-World War I and also going into World War II. Now, the thing about it, though, is that many South Slavic nations, though, at the time, were actually controlled by two large empires, right? See, these are who they're fighting against, right? These Slavic nations of Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Albania, like other areas like that, they're actually under the control of two large empires, right? So they're not able to have countries of their own because they're being suppressed, right? And those two large empires are Austria-Hungary, which was up here, and the Ottomans, which is down here in red, right? So there's some really important lands that we'll talk about a little bit later on in this general region that you know of in the modern era as Serbia and Bosnia that were controlled by these other different empires, and they wanted this control to end. And they supported each other in this movement of Pan-Slavism, and they have a big brother in the background that loves them and wants them to have this, and it's the Russians, right? Remember what we talked about at the beginning of this flip. The reason why the alliance, the League of Three Emperors, broke down is because the Russians and the Austrians couldn't agree on what to do with this area of the world, the Balkans, right? The Russians said, let them go and let them be their own countries, right? And the Austrians said, no, we own that land, it's ours, right? Well, what these tensions are going to lead to pre-World War I is these things called the Balkan Wars, right? From 1912 to 1913, this is going to fuel tension even further in South Slavic states, encouraged by nationalism because the Ottoman Empire is slowly dying. Right? The Ottoman Empire, which is not modernized, has not fully industrialized, and is also not just like the military powerhouse that it once was anymore, is beginning to lose small engagements against Balkan nations, and they're starting to lose a lot of power, right? And the thing about it, though, is as these Balkan Wars progress forward, it's leaving new countries out there in the open, like Serbia and Bulgaria, right? Now, what's going to end up happening, though, is that these nations are going to continue that pan-Slavic idea, though. And they're going to support some of these other people, like the Bosnians, for example, right? The Bosnians were still under the control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Serbians, now following the First Balkan War and the weakening of the Ottoman Empire, are going to believe that those Bosnians should be free just like they are. And it's going to lead to a dramatic amount of tension that is known by a very famous metaphor in history known as the powder keg, right? Now, a powder keg, and what we're referring to when we talk about a powder keg, is basically a giant barrel full of gunpowder, right? And giant barrels full of gunpowder are very unstable, right? And if you push them, hit them, or get a spark anywhere close to them, they will not just fuse off and burn out, they will explode, right? And the Balkan states are becoming known as the powder keg because it was ready to explode from anger and nationalistic tensions, right? Because those Slavic countries want their brethren in other Slavic countries to be free just like they are, right? And so the powder keg image is used to explain that really tense vibe going in to World War I. But we'll talk about that stuff a little bit later on when I see y'all in class, all right? Y'all have a good one.